we actually got a request from the comments from Drink Milk. Asking or saying, I've watched many tutorials of touch controls, but nobody shows how to script it. Touch control scripting is way different from keyboard, as you know, so how could I code it? So today we're going to take a look at coding the touch controls purely in script. So we're not going to touch any of the UI for it. We're going to do all of it in script. We're going to set it up and create it completely. Alright, so over here, all we have is we have our control node here to work in. And then I've just added a color rect so we can separate it, as you see when we boot this up here. So you can see it shows up in the bottom right, and it just helps separate it from that basic gray that we normally see. But that's all we have going on here. And I've attached a script, and this is just an empty script. There's nothing here, nothing going on. So with a brand new script, we can go ahead and start messing with things here. And it is worth noting that you will need to set the emulate touch from mouse setting on inside of your project settings. We can set this through code normally, however, it does not seem to function at all. I can show you how to do that right here. It's just, so we'll go into our ready function. We're going to set project settings dot set setting, and this takes two arguments. The first argument is a string, and that is the setting you want to change. And the second argument would be true or false, because this is a Boolean. And what we would get from that is, if we just hover our mouse over, that's going to be the input underscore devices underscore pointing emulate underscore touch underscore from, etc. So it would look something like this. Input devices, and then pointing slash, and our last one, emulate from, or emulate touch from mouse. I think I got that right. Emulate touch from mouse. Yeah. So this would be how we would set that setting for our project in code. However, this does not appear to work. For whatever reason, you can turn this true or false. It doesn't matter. The one that you set in the editor seems to override this. And I'm not sure why we can't set this, or why setting it through code doesn't actually work. Of course, we're not going to need, actually we will need our process function if we're going to set our controls. So show that, get rid of our unneeded variables here, and we can begin coding our touch button. So all we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable. And of course, if you create an array, you can always just loop through these with your names and everything based off of the size. But for this, I'm just going to call this Tobu for touch button. And I'll set this equal to touch screen button new, so we can create a brand new button. So now it's created, but we have to set it up in order to function properly, as well as have a texture that we can see, and add it into our scene. Now, since this is an on-screen button, you probably want to add this into a canvas layer. Either have this code running on a canvas layer, or make sure that you access the canvas layer node and add it to that. So just jumping in here, so we have our brand new touch button. We're going to need the textures for it. So if I were to come in here and we were to add a touch screen button, you can take a look. We have normal and press textures, as well as bit mask and shape if you want to get into more of those things. But all we really need is a normal, and if you want a pressed, and you can see the properties just normal and pressed. So I can delete that real quick. So coming in here, we're going to access Tobu, our touch button, and we're going to say dot normal, and we're going to set that equal to the image we want to use. Now, to use an image, we will need to load the image. Now, if you're doing this up in your variables up top, you can preload it if you would like. But instead of typing that in, I'm just going to grab my icon.png and drag it in here, because that already comes in as a string. And now we have that set for our normal. Now, if you wanted to set something up for your pressed, it would be exactly the same thing. Tobu.pressed equals load, and pass in the path to your image. So now that we have that working, we have our image, we're able to see it once it's added to the screen. We can go ahead and take a look at that. We can do add child. and just add Tobu in there. And if we run this, we can see there's our image. It's right up there at the top. Of course, nothing happens to it, but it's up there at the top. Now, if you want to set your position, we access tobu.position, and we can set that to a vector 2 of whatever arguments you want to put in here. Now, I don't remember what the default size. I think it's 1024 by 600 on this. So if I go to, let's set this at, I don't know, let's say 900. That's on the X, so that's only going to be 600 across. And that's 1024. Get a little lost there. So let's set this to, let's say 950. And going down, we're looking at 600, right? So 550, take a shot back. So we'll say 525. And if we run that now, we can see our button is now down here at the bottom. Now, of course, if you don't want it down the bottom right, you can set it wherever it is that you want it to be. It's no problem. So let's come over here and we can be like 25. And be good that way. You know, so whatever it is you want to set up for that. That's how you set your position for your buttons. Now, one of the important things that we need is to access the input, right? We need the button to actually do something. So to do that, there's one of two things we can do, depending on what it is you want that button to accomplish, right? So we can go in, we can access Tobu, and we can do connect. So we can connect a signal to this. And you can use pressed or released for your signal. Now, pressed is while you have the button held down, and release is when you let go, right? When you let the button come back up. Target, in this case, is self, because that is where our code is going to reside on this script, and then whatever you want to name it. So on, let's just call it on release. Obviously, if you're making this, you're probably going to have specific function names, specific buttons. So we can come in and do on release. And when it's been released, we can come in and just print button released. So if we run that now, we take a look in the output. When we click on it, we see button released. When I hold it down, nothing. When I lift up with my mouse, button released. So we can see we can run functions off of our buttons. So you can have inputs working this way if you would like. Alternatively, if I just, we just cut that connection out altogether, we can set the action. So we can go to tobu.action, and we can set that to whatever action that we have inside of our input. Now, I'm going to use one of the default ones, which is UI down. The default button for that is the down arrow key. So inside of process here, we're going to go ahead and make our check. Obviously, you can put, and you could do this in your input if you wanted, but we'll do if input.is action, we'll say just release, so we don't spam whatever it is we want. We want UI down. We'll go ahead and print. We'll say UI down has been pressed. We go ahead and run that. Now, if I hit the down arrow key, we see UI down has been pressed every time I hit it. And if I click on it, you can see it changing down here with the scroll wheel the scroll bar getting smaller and smaller. And if I were to restart that and would just use the mouse, you see UI has been pressed. Alright, so now we have our action, we have textures, and we have a position of our button, as well as our function working here, just as if it was a normal button being pressed. Like our keyboard, right? So if we come in here, and I'm going to run that one more time, I'm going to go to my remote tab and click on my button. Now you see it's got two @ symbols followed by the number 2 over here on the left hand side of my tree. Now we can give that a name so we can access it later or make it easier to debug if we need the name or whatever that we need. And we can set that easily in our script going accessing tobu.name, and we can set that to whatever string we would like. So say custom touch button with a name. And if I move this over on the screen, you can see we have all the properties of our touch button, and whatever you want to put in here. Obviously, there's our position, rotation. So if you want to rotate it, you want to change the scale, make it bigger or smaller. You can certainly touch on that. Of course, the default size of that button will depend on the size of the texture that you put into it. And all the normal things, visible on and off. You can toggle or change or modulate in there as well. So going into some of this stuff here, let's go tobu dot modulate equals color dot. Let's use one of the built-in ones. Let's add some orange, or rather coral as they call it here, into that. So now we see our name should be custom touch button here on our tree, and we should be modulating it by adding the coral color to it. And there we go, we have coral added down onto our button down there. And if we go to our remote tree, we can see we have our button, custom touch button, named. So continuing on that, let's do tobu dot scale equals let's do scale dot x equals, let's say 3, and we can do the same thing for the y. And now of course we're going to need to change these buttons a little bit, so let's place this at, let's say 100 so we can see it easier. And there we go, now we've changed the scale, we have a much bigger button, everything still works. And that's about all we really need to, I suppose, go over here for creating a touch button through code. So going over this again, we have our variable here to create a brand new touch button. We can set our normal and pressed textures here. You need to at least set a normal so that we can see it on screen. Pressed is optional, but is always a nice addition for a button. That way the user knows when it's being pressed and when it isn't. We just access the position property with tobu.position and assign that to a vector2 to place it somewhere on the screen. We can connect a signal to it if we want to call functions with our button instead of an action, or if you want to set an action just like you would with a keyboard input. We can do tobu.action, so we access the action property and we set that to a string of whatever the action is named. And of course you set those input actions inside of your project settings. We're using UI down as a default. You can set the name to make it easier to debug, or when you're looking at it, easier to know what button's doing what, or just easier to access in general. And of course we can access the other properties such as the modulate to tweak button colors, or access the scale to make it larger or smaller than the initial texture that was added in. And we can, in order to make this available to the user, we add it to the child, or we add the child to our code. In my case, I'm using the control node here that we're using, but if you're doing this on a game, then obviously you want to add this into your canvas layer. Alright, so with that, that's how we access all of these properties and how we create our touch screen button completely through code and allow it to do what it is that we want it to do, whether that's calling functions or acting like a button press to control something on screen. Alright, if you guys have any other questions or you want to see anything else, go ahead and leave it down in the comments. Now, this can always be GDScript like we've been going over on this channel, or it could be another language, maybe Python. Maybe you want to get into Python a bit, or just see some kind of comparisons of how you do things in one language versus another. But with that, take care, and I'll see you guys in the next one.